First of all, my name here is Mr. Odongo, yeah? So call me so. The other name are not commonly used by my students is David, but in full my name is David Odongo. I welcome you all to NTC College. I want to welcome you all to this class for BDA. I will be undertaking the teaching of this course until end of semester, and we have so far missed 2 classes. That is why we have this makeup for today. So I want to organize another class probably on Saturday to make up for the other lesson also missed, because we are 2 lessons late. Now, straight to business. Be very confident with what we'll do, because I am an expert in this area, yeah? And of course, I happen to be those dependable as far as the unit is concerned with 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐜. So be very confident, you're in safe hands. At the end of the semester, you should be able to pass very well. Now, the paper will comprise about 5 or 6 important areas. One will be data analytics, and you need to note them, and ICT and ICT, or for those who did it a long time ago, this is a MIS. Now, secondly, we shall discuss financial management. So financial management. Thirdly, we will discuss management accounting. Fourthly, we will discuss financial reporting. And then fourthly, we will discuss taxation. 5, and last, we will discuss auditing. So these are the 5 application areas that, of course, you are then required to know for you to, at the end of the semester, pass this paper. Of course, we shall not cover everything in the 5 application areas. Now, this should be 6, not 5. So that's 5, and then number 6. We shall not cover A to Z, because these are things you have done before. We shall not cover A to Z in terms of what should be discussed. Rather, there are again specified topics, specified application areas that we are then required to once again learn. So ladies and gentlemen, it will not be a matter of teaching these things afresh. It will be a matter of us reminding ourselves on what they were in terms of which concepts under each, we are required to learn. Once we have reminded ourselves, we will then proceed to see how they are applied now in the context of Excel. You realize I've started by introducing an Excel page because the rest of our meetings will mean that we use Excel. So you have to get used to Excel. If you have not done Excel before, then I will advise that you do the simple Excel package, which takes about 10 to 14 days, so that you are well conversant with some of the applications, which we will apply as we proceed to apply the concepts in these topics in Excel. So without wasting time, I will pick the first application area, and this will be number 2. That's financial management. For data analytics and ICT, I already sent some theory notes yesterday that will cover most of what we're required to know as far as that area is concerned, yeah? So please be going through the theory handouts, which I sent yesterday to your WhatsApp group. That will sort you out on number 1. So the first application area, which I will begin on today, will then be financial management. And the first question is that under financial management, what is it that specifically we are required to learn? Now, in this case, we shall be required to learn a number of things. One is the concept of time value of money. One is a time value of money. Number 2 will be the concept of NPV and the internal rate of return. Number 3 will be the concept of what you had called sensitivity analysis. Number 4 is the concept of scenario analysis. Number 5 will be the concept of the loan amortization schedule. So under financial management summarized, these are the 5 application areas which we shall spend time on discussing. And so in terms of what to note, that's what you need to note. All right. If at all we do not have any question, then of course we shall proceed to the first application area, which, like I've said, is the concept of time value of money. And so we have to remind ourselves of what this concept said. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I will want that we support each other in terms of these are things which are not totally new to all of us. So I do consider this being adult learning, and so I will request that we engage each other, yeah? So that as we then go through the course, things are easier for us. Because what I want to do is to relate these concepts are with real life, and where possible, we understand these concepts with real life experiences. So let me have probably a volunteer or possibly two volunteers to remind us of what time value of money as a concept is about. What is the concept of time value of money? Let's have somebody or two people reminding us of what this concept said. Yeah, you can actually decide to use real life experience, a real example. So let's have somebody who shall volunteer. Who shall volunteer? Somebody? Anderson and Faith Maggie. WGP. Could we have somebody volunteering to remind us of what the concept of time value of money is about? Let me have anyone. No answer is wrong, and so you don't need to fear. No answer is wrong. So anyone? Yes, could we have a volunteer? Anyone? Yeah, so definitely the concept is about money losing value over time, which is the same as money depreciating over time. The concept insists on a shilling today. A shilling today is worth more than a shilling tomorrow. A shilling today is worth more than a shilling tomorrow. And of course, this is evident even in cost of living today. If you are to go to a supermarket with 10,000 shillings today, you realize that you will shop less than if you were to go to a supermarket same time last year. The less shopping today compared to last year is because of money losing value, remember, over time. And such depreciation in money value is what the concept in time value of money teaches us. The concept of time value of money is then important in what we can call project evaluation. Because if you want to evaluate a potential future project, then you have to remember that because you will be talking about its future value, then such future values of cash flows or money then have to be discounted so that they reflect their present values, which are the values that you can use presently to then evaluate now such a project. The concept of time value of money is therefore important in project and investments evaluation, that then of course takes us to issue number 2, which is NPV and the internal rate of return as concepts of doing project evaluation. Our next discussion, therefore, shall be on the 2 project evaluation criteria, that is the net present value and the internal rate of return. Our starting point will be what is NPV. Before we can proceed to the internal rate of return, what's NPV, and based on it, how do we do project evaluation? So what's our net present value? Of course, this also you have come across before. So what's our net present value? Anybody? All right, so the net present value, remember, is the sum, of course, of our future cash flows. The sum of our future cash flows, of course, of a project, less what we commonly call the initial outlay. So that if you want to determine the net present value of a project, for example, then you'll take the sum of, this should be the sum of present value, the sum of present value of the future cash flows of any project you minus the initial outlay. In other words, for a project, you'll need 2 things. One is what are the future values? And then number 2, what's the initial outlay? The initial outlay is normally what you initially invest, remember, in a project. So if you take the future values of a project and discount them, and then you minus from the sum of those future values the initial outlay, then of course you end up with the NPV. And whichever NPV you compute, we can have either of 2 types. One is an NPV which is positive. Then of course we have an NPV which is negative. When NPV is positive, then remember that the project being evaluated will say that it's viable. And of course, when NPV is negative, then we'll say that a project is not viable. Viable means that it's a project you can proceed to undertake. Not viable means you shall not undertake it, unless of course you have other considerations to put in place. But of course, in terms of evaluation criteria, then that is what we follow. For a positive NPV, the project in question is viable, and so you can proceed to undertake. And then for a negative NPV, the project in question is not viable, and so you should not proceed to undertake it. That is for NPV and for project evaluation based on the NPV. Now next is the internal rate of return, the IRR. And how did you define the internal rate of return? In your earlier studies, you looked at it in terms of the rate of return. You looked at it in terms of the rate of return that gives NPV, that gives NPV, that gives NPV of 0. Any rate of return of a project that gives you an NPV which is 0, such a rate of return is the internal rate of return. The rate of return at which, for a project, you are at the break-even point. That's the internal rate of return. In terms of evaluating projects based on NPV, not NPV, but the internal rate of return, we'll say that a project is viable. We'll say that a project is viable. We'll say that a project is viable if the internal rate of return is more than cost of capital. So in case you compute for a project an internal rate of return, and the rate of return is one that is more than the existing cost of capital, then of course you shall say that such a project is viable. Of course, and vice versa. In case the internal rate of return is less than cost of capital for a project, then the project will not be viable. So based on or rather for decision criteria for project evaluation, we appreciate that's how you proceed to then evaluate projects. And if that is so, then ladies and gentlemen, I want us to begin on the first illustration. Then of course on the concept of NPV and the concept of the internal rate of return. So the first example, which of course you will type, is that assume the following. Assume the following information about project Y. Assume the following information about project Y. We are going to say that we have period, and then of course we have cash flow. We have period, and then we have cash flow. Because of the initial outlay, we do begin from period 0. And let's assume that for the initial outlay, that's for period 0. This is how much money? This is something like, let's have 100,000. And of course, for the initial outlay, you have to remember that because that's money that you spend, then of course you make that a negative, you make that a negative, you make that a minus. All right. We can then have period 2 with a cash flow of say 40,000. We can then have period 3 or rather period 2 with a cash flow of say 35,000. We can then have period 4 with a cash flow of say 60,000. We can then have period 5 with a cash flow of say 50,000 shillings. Let's assume that those are our cash flows and work with them that way. So let me just note that period zero is normally about the initial outlay. We do assume that period zero is the period in which you invest your first capital. So that first capital then amounts to the initial outlay. I will repeat that this must always be a negative because this is the money that we spend. That's money that we spend, and so that has to be a negative. Let's note thereafter that the cost of capital stands at, let's say, for example, 10%. 10% currently. 10% currently. And then what does the question require? The question will require that number one, calculate one is calculate NPV and advise on whether the project is viable. And then number two, again calculate the internal rate of return and again advise on whether the project is viable. So calculate the two. Based on those calculations, let's advise on the project viability. So that's the question, ladies and gentlemen. Read through the info so that we proceed to then solve it. Now, allow me to say that there are two ways in which we can compute NPV. And of course, for a reason, I will teach both ways. Let me just first say that we have solution. And then, of course, we are starting with number one, which ones that we compute NPV, which ones that we compute the net present value. Yeah. So there are two ways in which we can compute this figure, yeah? And let me start with the first way, which is the shortest. And this is using NPV function. Using NPV function. So using NPV function, using the NPV function. Now, let me remind that in Excel we do have very many functions. You know, for example, we have the financial functions. Like now the NPV function falls under the financial functions. The internal rate of return also falls under the financial functions. You will have other functions in management accounting, like the regression functions, of course, and so on and so forth. So Excel has so many functions. The most important thing is to know which one you want to use, and of course, how. So based on the function for NPV in Excel, yeah, getting this is actually a 1 minute thing. Getting this is a 1 minute thing because there is a direct formula for it. There is a direct function for it now in Excel. You will follow with me very keenly as we then go through this. Let me first remind, and of course you must always remember this, that when you want to apply any function in Excel, then starting point is an equal sign. So in a cell like I have done, you will start with an equal sign, and then after the equal sign, you will type what you want to compute. In our case, we want to compute NPV, so I will type NPV. And allow me to explain this. Once I type equal sign, then I type NPV, you can see down here that Excel confirms that surely we have a function for NPV. You can see down there that we have fx, meaning function, then NPV. So Excel confirms that we then have a function for the NPV. To then proceed to apply it, you will proceed, and after NPV, type the normal open bracket. You will type the normal open bracket. Again, when you type the normal open bracket, look at what happens. Look at what Excel does. Excel immediately tells you what the formula should be. You can see in bracket, Excel says that pick the rate, and then pick value 1, then pick value 2, and then comma, you have a dots meaning continuing, value 1, value 2, value 3, continued, of course, until the nth value. We can then proceed to have all this so that we get NPV. So once you have the open bracket, the rate is the cost of capital, which we have said in the question is 10%. So we shall type 10%. We shall type 10%. So 10, then the percentage, 10, then the percentage. And then thereafter, you will have a comma. You separate the next figure from that using a comma. So 10%, comma. Excel then says that pick value 1. Let's agree that in this case, values will be cash flows. Values will be cash flows. So I'll come back to the question. You can see that we have cash flows from period 0 all the way to period 5. Value 1 will be the cash flow for the first year. Let's be very clear. Value 1 is not the initial outlay. Leave out the initial outlay. Value 1 will be the cash flow for year 1. Of course, we should pick value 1, which is cash flow for period 1, then pick value 2, which is cash flow for period 2, and so on and so forth until the last value. What I'll then do to pick all the values, to pick all the cash flows from period 1 to, in this case, period 5, I'll simply drag to the last cash flow. I'll simply drag to the last cash flow. I'll drag to the last cash flow. That will mean that I have picked all my values from year 1 to year 5. I'll then close the bracket. I'll then close the bracket. I'll then close the bracket, and then I will type plus. I will type plus. I will type plus now the initial outlay plus the initial outlay plus now the initial outlay. So plus, then you click on the initial outlay. Plus, and then you click on the initial outlay. And then, ladies and gentlemen, press enter, press enter, press enter. When you press enter, our NPV is there for that figure. Our NPV is there for that figure, so that is there any question on how we compute that? Feel free to ask me to repeat in case you want me to repeat. Feel free to request that we repeat in case you want this repeated. So is it clear? Or you want me to repeat on this once more? Which is which? Yes, which is which? Is that clear? Somebody has commented in the chat, Dennis Mugenya, that's well elaborated. So it means nobody has the request for us to repeat. Thank you very much, 𝐒𝐻. Thank you very much, 𝐒𝐻. The periods should be up to period 4, not 3. So that is period 3, and then of course period number 4. So thank you very much. If that's clear enough, then let me say that this is the shortcut. This is the shortcut to getting NPV. This is the shortcut to getting NPV. Now, so that's method 1, with which you can compute the NPV figure. There is another method which will help us. It's a long method, yeah? But it will help us understand how to compute our present values for individual figures. Now, if you remember, calculating NPV manually meant that you computed the present value of the 4 cash flows for period 1 to 4. You then added them. And then from that, you did minus this initial outlay. If we are to go that approach to now help us know how to compute the present values of individual cash flows, then how do we proceed? How do we proceed about it? Okay, allow me to say that this is now using the long approach, using the long method. using the long approach, using the long method. So the long method, like I've said, would mean that we first get the individual present values for each of the cash flows, and then we add them to get their total present value. Now, once we have that, then of course we shall minus the initial outlay. So this would mean that we will have a column for the period. We will have a column for the period. We will have a column for the period. And remember, we'll start with period 1, period 2, period 3, and then period 4. Period 1, period 2, period 3, and then period 4. Now, the future cash flows are these ones. The future cash flows are here. The future cash flows are here. Like now, the future cash flow for period 1, we have 40,000. What we need is the present value. What we need is the present value, the PV, the present value for each of the cash flows. How do we get the present value, for example, for the 40,000 for period 1? I'll come to this cell and put an equal sign. The present value is also a function in Excel, yeah? The present value is also a function in Excel. And so, yeah, and so we'll start with an equal sign. And so we'll start with an equal sign. And so we'll start with an equal sign. You'll of course next type what you want to compute. Like in this case, we want to compute a present value. So you'll type PV. And just once again, you appreciate that Excel immediately confirms that we surely have a function for the present value figure. And so to continue to compute it, you'll have open bracket. So you'll have open bracket. You'll have open bracket. Now, once you do the open bracket, again, immediately, Excel tells you what to do. That start with the rate. And the rate we have said is 10%. So you type 10%, then you say that comma, you type 10%, then you say that comma, you then proceed to what Excel calls N per. Per means period. Per means a period. And so in this case, we shall pick period 1. N per, so per means a period. Per is the short form of period. So in that case, I pick period 1. In that case, I pick period 1. After I pick period 1, again, I comma. When I do that, Excel says that we pick PMT. Now, PMT is the same as the future value. And the future value, we have said that is this 40,000, remember, for period 1. But in this case, because we are looking for the present values of single cash flows, not annuities, before you can type the future value, which is 40,000 for period 1, then of course you shall type 0. You shall type 0 to show that that's a cash flow. To show that that's a cash flow for just period 1. Then of course you'll comma again. You'll comma again. And then of course you shall pick the future value. the future value period 1. The future value period 1 is now this 40,000 shillings. The future value period 1 is now 40,000 shillings. Now that is it, ladies and gentlemen. You can then close the bracket. You can then close the bracket. And if you close the bracket, appreciate that if you enter the present value, that we get is negative 36,363.64. Do not worry much about that currency, because there's not much about it. It's not significant. Of course, as this paper is marked for you people, yeah? So ignore it. Focus on the absolute figure. Now, allow me to say this, and please listen to this. By default, Excel will give this figure as a negative. But then, in accounting, negatives mean cash outflows. And so by having negative 36, that is not in line with the fact that this 40,000 is a cash inflow, which should not be a positive. So the next thing should be to make this figure a positive. And how do we make it a positive? Now, what you'll do is to click on the figure so that you go back to the formula for it. Click on the figure so that you go back to the formula for it. What I want you to do is, now the last cell, like in my case, please observe what I will do. In this formula, my last cell is F40. My last cell, which is for the future value, yeah, which is for the 40,000, is F40. Before that last cell, put your cursor before the last cell and just put a negative. Put a negative before the last cell. Put a negative before the last cell, like I have done, yeah? If you enter again, then that figure comes to a positive. Let me have a confirmation that that's okay. Could I have a confirmation from anyone that that's okay? Anybody? Is that clear? Is that clear? Anyone? Thank you very much for the confirmation. The three of you, Maggie, Anne, and 𝐒𝐻, Vincent, thank you very much. So somebody is asking, how did I get the figure before L40? So I'll just go to my figure again. I'll click on it so that I go to the formula for it. The figure before L40 is a 0. Just type a 0. My cell L40 is the 40,000, the cash flow period 1. I am saying that the figure before it, that is just a 0. So just type a 0. Just type a 0. So 0 is just a figure. 0 is just the normal 0. So just type a 0. So it's 10%, then cell L42, then 0. So you just type a 0. Then, did you mean L42 or L40? How did I get the figure before L40? I do not have L40 in my case, yeah? I do not have L40. I have L42. The figure before L42 is 10%. So I simply typed 10%. But if you mean the figure before F40, then that is just a 0. So just type a 0. All right, so you type 10% before L42, then you type a 0 before F40. And that's it for the present value. So what I want you guys to do is, can you compute the present values from period 2, period 3, and then period 4? Compute the present values for period 2 to period number 4. But of course, if you followed what I've done, if you did it exactly the way I have done it, then what we can do is to simply extend. I'll drag the formula to the last year. If you have done it the way I have done it, then I can use a shortcut to get all of them at once. Then I can use a shortcut to get all of them at once. If you did not arrange your work the way I arranged mine, then that may be next to impossible. So you may have to do it manually one by one. Otherwise, the figures I get are those ones. Otherwise, the figures I get are those ones. Now remember what you used to do. What you used to do was to then add these present values. What you used to do was to add these present values so that we get a total for all. And my total here, yeah, is 144,518. Remember 0.82. And then you used to say that from this total, we minus the initial. The initial outlay. And so that for the initial outlay, I'll simply copy from the question 100,000. And of course, if I minus that, yeah, if I minus that, then of course I get my NPV, and the NPV would come to, if I minus NPV, would come to the same figure as what I got before, yeah? So the same figure as what I got before. So irrespective of which of the two methods you work with, appreciate that you arrive at the same NPV figure. So allow me to repeat that the shortest one is the first one, which you work out based on the NPV function. The second one is also a method, and I have introduced it so that I help you understand, yeah, how you get the individual present values for individual cash flows. If you are to be asked to compute the individual present value, like now the 40,000 for period 1, then how do you proceed to compute it? Yeah. So in terms of how you get it, in terms of the function for it, in terms of the formula for it, then of course that's how you compute it. Again, allow me to have a confirmation whether that's clear. That's clear enough. Is that clear enough, or somebody needs more clarification? Is that clear enough, or somebody needs more clarification? Yes, anyone? All right, if that's the case, then that seems to be clear enough. The next, and yes, Coach, you are asking a very important question that in exams, do you type the questions? In exams, you do not type anything, you only type your answer. You do not type questions in exam, but of course, so that we learn practicing on typing these questions, sometimes I'll be making you to type them. But then in exams, the questions will come already typed in Excel. For you, it will simply be a matter of solving the question. So don't worry about question typing. They'll come typed for you in Excel, yeah? All right. We have then computed our NPV figures. What then is the decision criteria in terms of what is the advice on whether the project is viable or not? Because number one wanted we compute NPV, and then we advise on the project viability. Because NPV is positive, could somebody help us? Is the project viable? Yes, anyone? Is it viable? So thank you very much, Coach. Yes, the project is viable. So the decision criteria is that the project is viable. The project is viable. So if that's the case, then that is it for required number one. Let's go to required number two, which wanted that we compute the internal rate of return, which wanted we compute the internal rate of return, the internal rate of return. The internal rate of return we have already defined, and we have said that that is the rate of return of a project that gives us NPV, which equals 0. What is this rate of return for this project? That will give us NPV. That will give us NPV equaling 0. Like I did mention a while ago, the internal rate of return is also a function within Excel, and of course the financial functions. A function which based on, of course, we now determine the figure for it. So I'm saying that just like NPV, this also falls under the financial functions. And so we can compute this as simple as what? So again, because this is a function, you have to start with an equal sign. Please always remember, always note that whenever you're applying any function in Excel, starting point is the equal sign. Starting point is the equal sign, yeah? So start with an equal sign. Start with an equal sign. And then, of course, you will type that what we want to compute is the internal rate of return. You will type that what you want to compute is the IRR, is the internal rate of return. And then, of course, to compute it, you will have open a bracket. And then to compute it, we will have open bracket. Immediately you have the open bracket. Remember, Excel again directs you on what to do, that pick values. So in this case, you just pick values. And allow me to make this very clear. In this case, Excel is not saying that pick value 1, pick value 2, pick value 3, because when Excel says that value 1, value 2, and so on, Excel means that you pick the values for period 1, period 2, period 3, and so on. So in this case, Excel simply says that pick values. What this means is that we'll come to the cash flows. Values are the cash flows. Please do not forget. So pick the cash flows. You'll pick from the initial outlay, because you're now told that just pick values generally, not value 1, value 2, value 3, like we saw under NPV. So in this case, we be general and pick the values generally from the initial outlay. Of course, you drag to the last value. So you now pick from the initial outlay start with 100,000 negative all the way to the last value, and then close the bracket, and then close the bracket, and then close the bracket, then enter, then enter, then enter. Let me hope that you also get 28%. Let me hope that you also get 28%. And that's there for the internal rate of return. That is there for the internal rate of return. So that is there any question? Yes, anyone? Is there any question on how we get the internal rate of return? Anyone? Is there any question? Yeah, so someone says that I repeat on how to get the internal rate of return. So I'll simply delete this. I'll simply delete the internal rate of return. Then I will repeat that because we are working with the function for internal rate of return, yeah? And in general, when working with any function in Excel, you start with an equal sign. So I'll put my cursor in a cell, then start with an equal sign. The next thing is to type what we want to compute. Like in this case, we want to compute the internal rate of return, the IRR. And so to proceed to compute the internal rate of return, you'll then have an open bracket. You'll then have an open bracket. Immediately you have open bracket, Excel will direct you on what to do. That pick values. Pick values. Do not forget that values are cash flows. So the values are the cash flows. In this case, Excel says that generally pick values. So in this case, we shall pick all the cash flows. We shall pick from the 100,000 for the initial outlay all the way to the last cash flow. So you shall pick all from 100,000 negative for the initial outlay all the way to the last cash flow, which is 50,000. And then you'll close the bracket. And then you'll close the bracket. Then enter, press enter. When you press enter, then we have the 28%. Our internal rate of return for the project is therefore 28, is therefore 28%. Is therefore 28%. Is there any question? Is there any question? So is there any question? All right, thank you very much. Again, based on once we have this figure of 28%, we can then give the investment advice that what is the project viability? What are the project viability? Remember, for internal rate of return, compare that with the cost of capital. Compare that with the cost of capital. And then we have said that a project is viable if the internal rate of return is more than the cost of capital, yeah? So the internal rate of return is 28%. the cost of capital, we had 10%. So because the internal rate of return is more, then of course, the project is what? Viable. And that's the answer. That's the answer. Is there any question? All right. If there is no question, then I want to introduce the next thing. Yeah. There is the two project evaluation criteria, NPV and the internal rate of return, do have a common weakness. And this weakness will introduce us to the next concept, so that before we look at what the next concept is, what is this weakness that these two decision criteria have, yeah? That then, of course, introduces us to the next concept. The main weakness by the two approaches is that they assume regular cash flows. They assume regular cash flows. And don't worry, very shortly I'll explain what that means. They assume that cash flows are what? Regular. What does the regularity of cash flows mean? What this means is simple. The two approaches assume that the time frame between cash flow dates are similar. The time frame between cash flow dates are similar. Allow me to explain. NPV and the internal rate of return assume that the time frame between period 1 and 2, if this is 1 year, then even the time frame between period 2 and 3 must be 1 year. And even the time frame between period 3 and period 4 must also be 1 year, and so on. That is what we mean by regularity. So NPV and the internal rate of return assumes that regularity. The question, and especially in practice, is, will cash flows always remain regular? And the answer to this question is a no. Sometimes our cash flows are irregular, in the sense that the time frame between period 1 and 2 will not necessarily be the same as the time frame between period 2 and 3, and obviously will not be the same as the time frame between period 3 and period 4. So where such time frames are irregular, then using NPV and the internal rate of return will mean that you get answers which are not accurate. What is therefore the best thing to do? The best thing to do is to introduce two concepts which shall then cure this problem of assumption of irregularity of cash flows. This will bring us into introducing the concept of what we call X NPV, and again, X internal rate of return. We then must introduce the two concepts, the X NPV, to then cure the case of the NPV, and then the X internal rate of return to then cure the case for the internal rate of what? Return. By X, we mean 𝐒𝐻. So this shall be 𝐒𝐻 NPV, this shall be 𝐒𝐻 internal rate of return. The two X's shall help us compute the accurate NPV and the accurate internal rate of return where the cash flows are not what? Are not regular. And so, ladies and gentlemen, what we'll do is to end the class at that point for today. Now, I wish to request that we continue tomorrow. The time that I request for is the one that I don't know whether it will be weird for you, just so that we cover for what we have missed, because again, my schedule is very busy. Are you guys able to come to class from 5 p.m. to 7? Just for tomorrow. Then after that, we shall resume the normal Sunday class, which is comfortable for all of us. Is it possible if we can meet tomorrow, 5 to 7? Anybody? Yes? Is it comfortable if we can meet tomorrow, 5 to 7? Maggie, you are saying from 6? All right, then we can meet from 6 if that's okay. Then we can meet from 6 if that's okay with you people. Then we can meet from 6. Or no, just a minute. I'm forgetting that tomorrow is not Thursday. I don't know why in my mind I'm thinking tomorrow is Thursday. Actually, those timings are not possible for me. Can we meet the same time tomorrow? The same time? Yes? same time, 8? 8, yeah, we start at 8:30 tomorrow, same time? Yeah, I think it's unanimously agreed that same time, 8:30 tomorrow, yeah? All right, thank you very much. That will sort me at least for one class. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Because it's already 10, I think we stop there for fairness. Our families need us. So get back to family and enjoy time with family. So thank you very much. And please market us. Please take the news outside there in terms of how well we deliver this course. Bring us more and more as students so that we are more, of course, in this class. Those who have not yet joined, please join us. Join us so that we move through this together. We want to pass together. Last semester, I believe that almost the whole class passed. So why should you be left behind? Please join us and bring more people to join us, friends, family, and anyone you know that is doing this course. Tell them to join us so that we pass together. We don't want to pass without others. So thank you very much and God bless. Good night. Somebody is asking about we share the video. Yes, I will share the video. Thank you very much, everybody. Those who want the video, please send your email to the WhatsApp group through which your admin will share the video for today's class. God bless and good night.